And for the next hour, I'll be reading from the December 18th, 2025 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Thank you for joining us today. The highlights under business and finance are: bankers and investors look at Medline's successful debut as a public company are bracing for a slate of blockbuster IPOs in 2026 and wondering if the market can handle the torrent. Warner Brothers Discovery urged its shareholders to reject Paramount Skydance's hostile takeover bid, saying the Ellison family-led offer was inadequate on multiple levels. Weaker tech stocks helped pull U.S. indexes lower, with the S&P 500, NASDAQ, and Dow retreating 1.2%, 1.8%, and 0.5% respectively. The Justice Department indicted Adderall startup Doane Global a month after its founder and top doctor were convicted of a conspiracy to distribute controlled substances. The Oscars will leave ABC and appear on YouTube beginning in 2029 under a rights deal the video platform struck with the Academy for the awards show. BP said Chief Executive Murray Auchincloss is stepping down as head of the oil company and named an outsider as his successor. Elliott has built a stake of over $1 billion in Lululemon and is bringing a potential CEO candidate to the struggling athletic apparel retailer. Activist investor Irenic has built a stake of over 3% in Integer and is urging the medical device outsourcing company to refresh its board and consider a sale. Weyerhaeuser said it launched a venture to turn runny trees and sawdust from its mills into a replacement for coal used in steel making. Diageo would sell its major stakes in two Kenyan drink businesses to Japanese brewer Asahi for around $2.3 billion. Defense Group's KNDS plans to list its shares in Paris and Frankfurt next year to broaden its access to capital markets. Now for the key articles under the Worldwide section. 4 vulnerable House Republicans rebelled against Speaker Mike Johnson and backed a Democratic effort to force a vote on extending Affordable Care Act subsidies. The $8 billion black market for Venezuelan oil, a lifeline for the Maduro regime, is in jeopardy as the U.S. targets ships already sanctioned by the Treasury Department. The Senate approved a sweeping defense policy package despite alarm over a provision that rolls back safety measures put in place after a fatal mid-air collision over the Potomac River in January. The U.S. government accepted fault for the mid-air collision, which killed 67 people near Washington, D.C. Trump defended his handling of the economy during a rare primetime speech and announced a 1,776 warrior dividend check for active duty service members. A federal appeals court allowed Trump to continue deploying National Guard units in Washington, D.C., at least temporarily. A group of Democratic senators asked the Justice Department to explain why federal law enforcement never interviewed Epstein's lawyer or accountant when they investigated his sex trafficking case. Trump received and discussed a draft copy of a book by lawyer Alan Dershowitz that studied whether Trump could constitutionally serve a third term as president. Federal authorities in Massachusetts charged two Boston men with stealing nearly $7 million in food stamp benefits. The incidence of heart attacks and lung conditions jumped among Los Angeles residents after the wildfires of nearly a year ago, a new study found. Dan Bongino said he is stepping down as the FBI's deputy director after a 9-month tenure in which he clashed with the Justice Department leadership and the Bureau's workforce. FCC Chair Brendan Carr told a Senate oversight hearing that the commission isn't an independent agency, contradicting a description that, until then, had been featured on its website. Died Peter Arnett, 91, Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter. The picture on today's front page is a somber scene of 4 soldiers carrying a casket, and in the background, President Trump is saluting. And that caption reads, "Paid respects." President Donald Trump saluted as the bodies of 2 Iowa Guardsmen, Sergeant Edward Brian Torres Torvar and Sergeant William Nathaniel Howard, as well as interpreter Ayad Mansour Sakat, arrived at Dover Air Force Base in Delaware on Wednesday. They were killed in an attack in eastern Syria, where U.S. troops are part of a coalition fighting Islamic State. Wall Street gets early taste of hot year expected for IPOs. Shares of Medline begin trading in the biggest new stock listing since 2021, by Corey Drybush. Wall Street is getting a glimpse of what could be the biggest year ever for IPOs in the U.S. After 4 years of choppiness in the market for new stock offerings, bankers and investors are bracing for a slate of blockbuster listings in 2026 and wondering if the market can handle the torrent. Medline's stock market debut Wednesday could offer an early gauge of whether investors will be up for it. The medical supply company raised roughly $6.3 billion in its stock offering, making it the biggest initial public offering in the U.S. since Rivian's stock offering in 2021. Medline stock closed at $41, up 41% from its $29 IPO price. The stock is listed on the NASDAQ stock market under the symbol MDLN. "We're the largest company no one's ever heard of," said Jim Boyle, chief executive of Medline. He said he and his team have spent the past year and a half educating the investment community ahead of the stock offering. The offering could help set the stage for some of the most highly anticipated IPOs with rocket maker SpaceX, artificial intelligence company Anthropic, and mortgage giants Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac among the companies looking at listings in 2026. It isn't just high-profile private companies. Bankers say their teams have been busy in recent weeks pitching companies to be a lead advisor on their IPOs next year, marking a pickup in activity. Many startups have eschewed going public in recent years. Quote, "I'm not sure that's entirely true anymore," end of quote, said Magdalena Heinrich, head of U.S. Technology Equity Capital Markets at Bank of America. Revolt in GOP on health exposes party rift. Lawmakers fearing lapse in enhanced subsidies sign on to House vote on ACA by Siobhan Hughes, Lindsay Wise, and Richard Rubin. Washington. 4 vulnerable House Republicans repelled against Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, and backed a Democratic effort to force a vote on extending Affordable Care Act subsidies, exposing GOP fractures over surging health care costs headed into next year's midterm elections. Representative Mike Lawler, Republican from New York, joined 3 Republicans from Pennsylvania's swing districts, Representatives Brian Fitzpatrick, Rob Bresnahan, and Ryan McKenzie, in signing a petition led by House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, that would force a vote on a 3-year extension of enhanced ACA subsidies. The lawmakers acted after the GOP leaders blocked votes on compromise measures aimed at extending and trimming the subsidies, saying their voters' needs were urgent. The split among Republicans shows the challenges confronting the party, with about 20 million people on ACA plans facing higher cost due to the expiration of the enhanced subsidies at the end of this month. Republicans are hoping to hang onto a thin majority in the House, but the party is divided over whether to rescue the subsidies, which Democrats passed in 2021 with no GOP support. With the GOP signatures, Jeffries has the 218 needed to force a vote, which wouldn't likely occur until after the holiday break. But the centrist move could keep up pressure on both parties to reach a deal, and talks were continuing in the Senate on a possible compromise for early in the new year. The defections delivered a blow to Johnson's leadership in the House, where he has been forced to manage a historically narrow majority, currently 220 to 213, that gives any small bloc of Republicans power to derail his agenda. "We're keeping a productive conversation going," he told reporters. "I have not lost control of the House." Johnson had said he wouldn't hold any vote on subsidies this week, citing objections from many Republicans who call the ACA a failed program that has done nothing to rein in health care costs. In a television appearance early Wednesday, Johnson warned colleagues against trying to bypass leadership, and he pledged that the party would tackle health care policy changes in the new year. Doing an end run around the majority party, the speaker, or the regular process is not the best way to make law, he said on CNBC. The House separately passed a GOP health care bill late Wednesday that would expand access to association health plans, which generally allows small employers to band together and provide health insurance, and appropriate money to fund the cost-sharing reductions that reduce out-of-pocket spending for lower-income ACA enrollees. It doesn't include any ACA extensions or the health savings accounts favored by many Republicans. The bill passed 216 to 211, largely along party lines. The 4 Republicans who signed the Democratic petition had been loath to sign up behind Jeffries, who they saw as playing hardball politics meant to embarrass Republicans rather than seeking a deal. But in the end, their aggravation with their party led them to deliver the crucial signatures. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Blockade by U.S. hamstrings Venezuelan oil strategy. About 75 tankers are loitering in Venezuelan waters, half of them sanctioned. By Benoit Falcon, Costas Paris, and Shelby Holiday. Venezuela used the same playbook as Russia and Iran to get around crippling American sanctions on its oil industry, tapping a shadowy fleet of aging vessels to carry crude to customers. President Trump's partial oil blockade threatens to devastate this black market, which U.S. officials say lines Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro's pockets and props up the impoverished country's fragile economy. U.S. officials said the military would be going after a network of ships already sanctioned by the Treasury Department. Such tankers account for about 70% of Venezuela's oil exports, mostly sent to Asian buyers who pay in cryptocurrencies, Venezuelan economists said on the country's public radio Wednesday. Losing access to that network of ships would reduce Venezuelan revenue by some $8 billion a year, The Economist estimated. Some sanctioned tankers have already turned around to avoid the U.S. Navy flotilla in the Caribbean, which has already seized one vessel last week. At least one tanker has left Venezuela since that ship, the skipper, was confiscated, but it was carrying fuel oil, not the more valuable crude. About 75 tankers are loitering in Venezuelan waters, and half are on the U.S. Treasury's blacklist for sanctions violators, according to tankertrackers.com. About 24 are typically used to export crude oil. The blockade, the word Trump used, is better than a quarantine, U.S. officials said, since legal tankers will still have free passage to Venezuela, and a real blockade is considered an act of war under international law. But it still marks the most extraordinary use of U.S. military might to enforce oil sanctions against Venezuela. The hard truth for Venezuela is that it is more vulnerable to an oil embargo because it isn't a military power like Russia or Iran, which also face stiff U.S. oil sanctions that are loosely enforced. The war on poverty failed Appalachia. McDowell County isn't waiting for government to restore its fortunes. By Dan Frosch. War, West Virginia. Carolyn Owens was 9 years old when her family became one of the first in America to get food stamps. Her father could no longer work in the coal mines that pack the mountains here after an injury. He'd wait at the local government office to collect food coupons, part of a program launched by John F. Kennedy in 1961 to help alleviate the shocking poverty he witnessed campaigning across Appalachia. Owens would walk home from school to find peanut butter sandwiches with a sliver of banana waiting for her and her 10 brothers and sisters. Those sandwiches were like ice cream for us, said Owens, now 73. In the decades since, the federal government has poured more than $3.6 billion into trying to ease the hardship in McDowell County, according to the Economic Innovation Group. That doesn't include the roughly $13 billion more in Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid payments. It hasn't worked. Here, in the heart of America's war on poverty, some 2/3 of households with children still get food stamps, among the nation's highest rates. Non-farm employment has plummeted 78% since 1975, according to data compiled by the West Virginia University economist John Deskins, as the coal that once powered this rugged place is now mostly mined with machines, if at all. The county has lost 67% of its residents over those years, the largest drop in West Virginia, its population dwindling from just over 51,000 to roughly 17,000. With little faith left in government to break the cycle of poverty, those who remain say it's up to them to forge a brighter economic path. We're on our own, said Jason Tart. Nobody's coming down here to save us. Tart, the grandson of coal miners, is teaching locals, including retired miners and those recovering from opioid addiction, how to farm the forested hillsides. Down the winding 2-lane roads that connect communities, a pastor organizes bottled water drives for neighbors whose tap water is undrinkable. A tiny former coal town is trying to transform a shuttered Walmart into a new factory it hopes will jolt the local economy. Their efforts are small in comparison to the government programs that have sought to revive McDowell County and can't make up for the prosperity that slipped away when the coal companies left. But they are spurring hope for renewal in some places, driven by one of the few constants here: resilience. With limited tax revenue to support local initiatives or infrastructure, a network of nonprofits has sprung up. Many are funded with federal grants and private donations and run by locals. Most have had to figure out how to keep going when government money runs out. The people here strive for self-reliance because they know that mines open and close and government programs end. But they'll always find a way to take care of their children, said Randall Johnson, whose nonprofit, the Council of the Southern Mountains, pushed for the food stamp program here back in the 60s. Warner Brothers presses Ellison on bid terms by Lauren Thomas and Joe Flint. Warner Brothers Discovery sent a message to Larry Ellison. If you want to buy our company, sign on the dotted line yourself. Warner urged its shareholders Wednesday morning to reject Paramount's Skydance's hostile takeover bid saying the Ellison family-led offer was inadequate on multiple levels compared with that of rival Netflix. Warner said it had lingering concerns about the financing, including the use of an Ellison family trust to backstop the deal. The company wants Ellison to give a stronger personal guarantee that he, not an opaque trust, is fully committed to the $77.9 billion bid. The billionaire founder of Oracle is among the world's richest men, even briefly holding the title of the very richest this year. Yet his son David is fighting over Warner, just as Oracle shares are under pressure over concerns about its bets on the artificial intelligence boom. The stock fell another 5% on Wednesday on reports of a potential financial partner spurning a data center Oracle was building. Paramount's $77.9 billion bid is a higher price for Warner than Netflix's $72 billion offer. But Warner is saying it isn't that simple. Netflix is buying only Warner's studio and HBO Max streaming businesses. Warner holders would still own a spin-off housing Warner's cable networks, including CNN and TNT. And Warner is saying it can't know if Paramount's all-cash bid will close unless the Ellisons disclose more about the trust or sign a deeper commitment. Air Safety Workers' Bonuses Backfired by Dean Seal and Ellison Poll. Bonus payments aimed to motivate hard workers and inspire them to go the extra mile. For many air traffic controllers and airport security officers, they are having the opposite effect. After the U.S. government shut down this fall, the Trump administration pledged $10,000 bonuses to hundreds of air traffic controllers, technicians, and Transportation Security Administration officers, intended to recognize workers who consistently came in despite working without pay. But only a small number of controllers qualified for the bonuses. Federal agencies said the awards were coming to 311 unionized controllers out of a workforce of about 13,000. 423 unionized technicians out of at least 6,000, and an unspecified number of TSA officers. The American Federation of Government Employees, which represents TSA officers, has sought records detailing the criteria for the bonuses, saying the eligibility requirements weren't clear. The National Air Traffic Controllers Association labor union has said it is concerned about the exclusion of thousands of controllers who consistently reported for duty during the shutdown with minimal time off. Recognition should bring the workforce together, not divide it, wrote Nick Daniels, the Air Traffic Controller Union's president, last month in an internal memo reviewed by the Wall Street Journal. The bonus payments perfect attendance requirement for air traffic controllers, which included overtime shifts, has amplified frustrations, according to controllers. Awards have been denied for controllers who missed as much as an hour of work due to fatigue, military leave, or time off that was scheduled as much as a year in advance, they said. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the editorial page, a reparations loan for Ukraine. Europe considers a legal workaround to seize Russian assets. Donald Trump is sidelining Europe as he pressures Ukraine to accept a bad peace, but the continent still holds at least one strong card if it can muster the will to play it. More than $245 billion in Russian assets are stranded in the European Union. Most of the frozen Russian cash is held by Euroclear. The Belgium Global Settlement House in Europe has approved using interest from these assets to support Ukraine. But the EU keeps offering excuses to avoid confiscating the underlying funds. Enter the proposed reparations loan for Ukraine, a sleight of hand to seize Russian assets in practice. The idea is to turn Russian assets into a financial Schrodinger's cat. The money is and isn't in the box. The EU would borrow some $164 billion from Euroclear on the basis of the Russian assets and issue an interest-free loan to Ukraine. Kyiv would be obligated to repay only when the war ends, and Russia pays reparations. Meanwhile, Russia's Euroclear claim would remain intact. The idea has gained traction as Ukraine faces an acute cash shortage. The EU and its member states have already allocated more than $92 billion in financial backing for Ukraine, not including additional humanitarian and military support, according to the Kiel Institute, a German research outfit. European taxpayers may ask why they're paying when Moscow isn't. Opposition to the loan scheme comes mainly from Belgium, which worries that if something goes wrong, it could be left on the hook to Russia for a sum roughly equivalent to a third of its GDP. The EU sought to mitigate that concern last week by invoking an economic emergency to keep Russian assets frozen until a qualified majority decides otherwise. Sanctions previously had to be renewed by unanimous consent every 6 months, and the risk was that Russia could call in its claim if Hungary's pro-Russian government acted as the spoiler. But Belgium wants even stronger guarantees and cites additional legal concerns. It also worries the reparations loan maneuver could increase borrowing costs for EU states and undermine confidence in the euro as a reserve currency. Yet foreign investors can surely discern that this loan idea isn't a typical contract dispute, but an exceptional recourse to Mr. Putin's neo-imperialist threat to Europe. Vladimir Putin didn't fret about violating international law when he invaded Ukraine. Euroclear hasn't ruled out suing the EU over this plan, and its concerns are more concrete. A reparations loan would be a de facto confiscation that would preserve Euroclear's liability to the Russian Central Bank. Moscow has frozen nearly $20 billion in Euroclear assets held in Russia. And on Friday, Russia's central bank said it will sue the company in a Moscow court for recovery of damages. Euroclear has client assets in more than 50 countries, and Russia could try to go after it elsewhere. It would be a perverse irony and a pathetic display of weakness if Europe lets Russia use the West's legal norms to reclaim its money after Russia violated every modern norm while trying to conquer Ukraine. The EU Observer reports that Euroclear executives have received threats of violence from a possible Russian intermediary. Suspicious drones have recently loitered near Belgium airports, military bases, weapons factories, a nuclear power plant, and critical infrastructure, which looks like Russian intimidation. When Vladimir Putin perceives weakness, he exploits it. So moving on Russian assets is one way to strengthen European deterrence. The cleanest solution would be to ditch the complicated workaround and directly confiscate the money. Yet, if this scheme is the best that Europe can muster, it's better than letting Mr. Putin literally get away with murder and reclaim Russia's assets as if nothing happened. California's stranded solar assets. Regulators force PG&E to keep open the money-losing Ivanpah plant. Remember when the climate lobby claimed that fossil fuels would become stranded assets, so oil and gas companies should start winding down their business? These days, that better describes some green energy investments. Ford Motor this week wrote down some $19.5 billion in electric vehicle investment. Now, Pacific Gas, an electric company, is fighting California regulators to pull the plug on a costly solar plant. We wrote about the Ivanpah solar project in the Mojave Desert when it began operating in 2014. The $2.2 billion plant received investments from Google, NRG Energy, and Bright Source Energy, as well as a $1.6 billion loan guarantee from the Obama administration. Don't forget a 30% federal tax credit and a $535 million Treasury grant. The Ivanpah plant used embryonic solar thermal technology that generated power from hundreds of thousands of mirrors focusing sunlight onto giant towers. But it produced far less power than expected, and at more than 4 times the cost of new solar photovoltaic projects. It was also the world's biggest bird fryer, incinerating thousands of birds a year. PG&E earlier this year announced plans to terminate its power purchase agreement with the plant to save customers money. The utility said it didn't need Ivanpah's electricity to meet the state's 60% renewable mandate or ensure grid reliability, since solar photovoltaic projects combined with batteries could provide electricity at lower cost. Energy analyst Robert Bryce calculates that nixing Ivanpah could save ratepayers about $100 million a year. No matter, say the energy regulators who work for Governor Gavin Newsom. The State Public Utilities Commission rejected PG&E's plan this month because it risks stranding sunk infrastructure cost, namely in transmission systems. Ratepayers spent hundreds of millions of dollars to connect the plant to the grid. Now the state plans to force them to keep subsidizing the project, which wasn't economic even with a tower of government handouts. Ford took a write-down on EVs to cut its losses. California regulators want to make ratepayers pour good money after bad. One reason California electric rates are the second highest in the country after Hawaii is that regulators impose mandates with little regard to cost. The state renewable mandate compels utilities to enter into long-term contracts for solar and wind when they cost significantly more. California's climateers say this is the price for being a pioneer. No, it's the price of putting the ideology of imminent climate apocalypse above common sense. A nonsensical GOP House revolt. Democrats set an Obamacare trap. 4 Republicans fall into it. Pity House Speaker Mike Johnson, who is struggling to keep his caucus together as vulnerable members prioritize their own survival. As President Trump's approval rating has sunk, some Republicans have decided it's every member for himself. 4 of them on Wednesday signed a Democratic discharge petition to extend the pandemic-era Obamacare subsidies. As we reported on Tuesday, Mr. Johnson negotiated a GOP consensus bill of insurance market reforms that didn't extend the subsidies. The legislation's goal is to give workers and small businesses an alternative to the heavily subsidized Obamacare plans and give Republicans an alternative they could point to with voters. But New York's Mike Lawler and Pennsylvania's Brian Fitzpatrick, Rob Breshnahan, and Ryan McKenzie went their own way and signed a Democratic petition to force a vote on a 3-year subsidy extension. They did so even though Mr. Johnson suggested they could have a vote on an amendment to his bill if they could find spending cuts to offset the cost of the extension. This would have required proposing other reforms, and the Republican renegades said no. Their sole aim is to protect themselves from Democratic attacks. But signing the petition is unlikely to provide much insulation. It will instead give Democrats more confidence that they have Republicans on the run and Chuck Schumer more leverage to scare GOP senators to revolt as well. As Mr. Lawler correctly observed, Democrats want the Obamacare subsidy expiration to bludgeon Republicans. They want the issue, Mr. Lawler told Politico. That's why Minority Leader Chuck Schumer put a nonsensical 3-year vote on the floor of the Senate when given an opportunity. If it's nonsensical, why is Mr. Lawler supporting nonsense? Perhaps because he's looking for a life vest to stay afloat as Mr. Trump's unpopularity threatens to wipe out Republicans in swing districts next November. Mr. Trump's approval rating is a negative 10 percentage points on the Real Clear Politics average, up from a positive 6 when he began his second term. Voters say he's not focusing enough on inflation, and his tariffs are contributing to higher cost. Democrats have been using affordability as a weapon to potent effect. The average voter swing in House special elections this year has been about 15 points. Mr. Lawler won his district by about 6 points. The Pennsylvania Republicans who signed the petition are also vulnerable as independent voters sour on Mr. Trump's economic stewardship. That's no doubt why Mr. Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance have visited Pennsylvania to talk up their economic record. Mr. Trump acknowledged this week that Republicans might lose the House next November. That's why he has pushed Republicans to redraw maps to give his party more seats. But gerrymanders won't save the GOP if the party loses a debate on health care and prices. Democrats laid out a political trap for Republicans with the expiring subsidies, and the four renegades have fallen into it. If Republicans want to vote like Democrats, why vote for a Republican majority? You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the opinion pages, alarm bells ring. Are you listening? Between his rallies and online ranting, Trump is setting up a nasty midterm loss. By Karl Rove. It's a season of jingle bells and sleigh bells for most of us, but for the White House, alarm bells should be clanging. The administration is making mistakes that could result in a nasty 2026 midterm defeat for President Trump's party. His approval rating in the Real Clear Politics average is 43.6%. His handling of the number one issue for voters, the economy, has 40.7% approval, while his approval on inflation is 35%. Seeing these significant hurdles to the GOP's midterm prospects, the president's advisors have reverted to campaign mode. They dispatched Mr. Trump to a rally at a casino in northeastern Pennsylvania last Tuesday. Mr. Trump likes the energy and adoration of his rallies. They're packed with hardcore supporters, eager to hear his every word and participate in the spectacle and energy. Last week in Mount Pocono was no exception. For nearly 100 minutes, the crowd got the whole Trump experience. He was brought on to Lee Greenwood's God Bless the USA and walked off to YMCA by the Village People. In between were red hats, presidential dancing, and the weave. That's how Mr. Trump describes his speaking style. He goes from reading carefully prepared texts on a teleprompter to impromptu asides, spicy attacks on enemies, meandering anecdotes, personal observations, often about nothing much, then back to the teleprompter. It's sometimes disjointed, often confusing, always entertaining. He and the audience love it. Therein lies the problem. With his approval numbers, Mr. Trump should be focused on building America's trust in his administration. But the fun of bouncing from topic to topic and joke to joke in a rally is too much for him to resist. The president did say he has no higher priority than making America affordable again, but seemed uninterested in offering further changes. Democrats caused the high prices and were bringing them down, he asserted. After congratulating himself that, in my first term, we built the greatest economy in the history of the world, he mocked the affordability issue as a hoax before admitting his staff told him not to say that. Mr. Trump despises Joe Biden, yet he's making the same mistake his predecessor made. Mr. Biden and his allies looked disconnected from reality, when they proclaimed Bidenomics is working, even as ordinary Americans struggled with inflation. Telling voters not to believe their own lying checkbooks was politically insane. Mr. Trump is doing the same thing. Perhaps if during the rally the president had stayed on the issue at hand, he would have eventually offered something genuinely reassuring to voters. Instead, he spent most of his time on how he ended 8 wars, deployed the military to destroy drug runners, and cracked down on illegal immigration. He defended his trips to the Middle East, trashed Obamacare, attacked the Federal Reserve, complimented his own energy policies, denounced Somali immigrants, and shared that his favorite word is tariff. Some in the White House must have realized how badly the Mount Pocono rally went. The administration sent Vice President J.D. Vance to Allentown, Pennsylvania, a week later to clean up. I know that there is so much more progress to be made, Mr. Vance told the audience, displaying his empathy by saying he knows what it's like when you have to choose between putting food on the table or getting the prescription that you need to stay healthy. Deploying the vice president to tidy up after his boss is a bad sign. Team Trump needs an alternative to rallies. Few will likely remember Mr. Vance's remarks. On Monday, Mr. Trump grabbed the national spotlight when he decided to make a self-absorbed Truth Social post trashing Rob Reiner after he and his wife were gruesomely murdered. This was a Hollywood couple with typical liberal Hollywood political sentiments. So what? He was a beloved television star and gifted movie director. She was a talented photographer. Friends described them as warm, big-hearted, caring, and generous. Mr. Trump's comments were met with universal horror and revulsion. What the president said about the Reiners didn't diminish them, it diminished him. The adage, if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all, is especially true when the subjects are a treasured elderly couple stabbed to death, allegedly by their son. The president's grotesque queries have to stop. His team has 10.5 months before voters decide the shape of his final 2 years as president. Every day matters. Presidential postings like that chew up valuable time that should be spent winning over tepid support or persuading anyone open to voting Republican. It doesn't look good for the GOP next year. The White House is on the wrong track. It had better get its messaging right, both its formal attempts at directing the conversation and Mr. Trump's spontaneous social media rants, or else the president won't like the outcome. A furious party in revolt against its executive, who is plagued by Democratic investigations and opposition. Time's a-wasting. The Biggest Fraud in Welfare by Phil Grimm and John Early. Something is profoundly wrong with the U.S. welfare system, a problem that runs far deeper and is more dangerous than the shocking fraud in Minnesota that has been making headlines. Across the past half-century, America has seen what in any other country would be considered a golden age, in which lower-income households have made incredible progress. Despite the end of our post-war economic dominance around 1975, the country's real per capita gross domestic product grew by 142% from 1974 to 2024. More than 2/3 of U.S. households have inflation-adjusted incomes today that would put them in the top 1/5 of households in 1967. 62% of the children who grew up in the poorest fifth of all households in the 70s and 80s worked their way up to a higher income bracket as adults, some all the way to the top quintile. Yet, even as our economy has experienced broad-based growth, real federal welfare spending has soared by 765%, more than twice as fast as total federal spending, and now costs $1.4 trillion annually. Were that money simply doled out evenly to the 19.8 million families the government defines as poor, each household would receive much more than $70,000 a year. The source of this dramatic mismatch is a fraud built into how various programs determine welfare eligibility. The government doesn't count any refundable tax credits or benefits that aren't paid in cash as income to the recipients. Some claim this is appropriate because the beneficiaries aren't free to spend non-cash benefits on whatever they like. But that is a specious argument because money is fungible. Receiving Medicaid, for example, frees up cash that would otherwise be spent on health care, allowing the recipients to spend the newly freed cash on other things. Non-cash benefits aren't in the end that different from income, except that salaries are taxed while government benefits aren't. And individual welfare programs often don't even count benefits paid in cash as income for the purpose of gauging eligibility. The government's failure to count its largesse as recipients' income allows welfare households to blow past the income level above which a working family no longer qualifies for government help. Welfare reform would not only help the nation begin to deal with its budget problems, but could be a powerful issue in American politics headed into the 2026 elections for those willing to champion it. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the December 18th, 2025 issue of the Wall Street Journal. We read from the Wall Street Journal every Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. Your reader has been Corrine. Thank you for listening and have a wonderful holiday as I will see you in the new year.